Thank you. It is always super awkward to sit and hear someone introduce you because those bios, can you hear me all right? Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me all right? Those bios always leave out the um, most crucial components of who we are, our parents, our grandparents, those inherited goodnesses that have come down the family line, and then some of those hardships that we all inherit. So I always like to make sure and pay homage to not only my ancestors that flow through me in my living presence now, but my grandparents who very much molded me and instilled courage in me to not only be curious and question the truth, but also do introspective work and be courageous, even more courageous to question our own experience. So I was prepared to do a presentation today, and so Jeff and I have been preparing for today since 2019 PC, so pre-COVID, and then the world happened to come to a complete stop. And what was really neat was to get a follow-up and just kind of hear that things are back into action here in this community, in this museum, and then to begin a conversation of, well, how do I come here and share not only my story, but the story of very many displaced people worldwide. So thank you, Jeff. And thank you to your entire team. I am so impressed and in a good way jealous of the type of museum that the community in Idaho Falls has. In Twin Falls, I think we have a lot of aspiration to become a learning center, a cultivating center, like you are in this community. So thank you again for having me. I think today what I'd like to do is have a conversation and not just the presentation. And more importantly is have a conversation with you. So I will go through presenting a little bit about my life, but I'm really excited to have a question and answer session because it would be very arrogant of me to assume that you will be learning more from me. I'm looking at the graceful demographic that's in this room and the age of the demographic in this room, that you would learn more from me than I would from you. So I look forward to having that conversation with you. When someone says that life is hard, I ask them in response, compared to what? And when I find myself experiencing a phase or a portion, even of my day, that I think, oh, this is challenging, this is hard, I try to posture myself back into that question and ask, compared to what? For 72 million displaced refugees, displaced humanity, 72 million as of by today's numbers, half of whom are children. Life is not only hard, but it is unsafe, uncertain, and immediately extremely violent. Unlike immigrants who choose to leave their home country and seek a better life of opportunity in another country, refugees have no such choice. War, genocide, and natural disasters force them out of their home and countries as their lives are in immediate danger. My earliest life memory is playing on the beach of the Caspian Sea, sweeping my hands through the sand, hearing the waves and the laughter of my family and friends. This is not my family. And that's not me. And my parents aren't that much of millennials. But I don't have a picture of my family at the Caspian Sea enjoying life. So I thought I'll go with the next closest resemblance. So that's my mother, my father, my brother, and I. My childhood was very pleasant. It was so pleasant that I can tap into the few years of pure innocent goodness, simple goodness, and leverage that against the nightmare that I experienced after the war started. It was my life in Baku, our family's life in Baku, Azerbaijan, was perfect. My parents made good money. We had everything we needed for a comfortable life. Baku, if you're not familiar with this area of the world, there's Russia, there's the Middle East. Armenia is what's kind of the connection point of East and West, and Russia and the Middle East. Some of you know the history of the Silk Road, and it went right through Azerbaijan and Armenia. In fact, there's documentation in the journals of Marco Polo that describes Baku as a thriving metropolitan, and they're just so amazed by how lively and business-centered this capital city was by ancient times. And when we were there, when we lived there and growing up there, and even today, it is the international business center of the region, and in Asia also. So there's Baku, the little tip. In the Soviet Union, or part of the Soviet Union. Azerbaijan was one of the 15 republics of the Soviet Union. It was home to by those standards, over 2 million people, and was a multicultural mosaic and the dynamic business center of the region. We loved the life we had there. We had no desire to leave this life behind or live anywhere else in the world. And something that I like to also point out is to put into context the modern conflict and war that's happening between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and the modern discussion and dialogue about recognition of the Armenian genocide of 1915. And I'll go a little bit more into that. There is the historic Armenia, which also at one point was from sea to sea. That's when King Tigran had the Armenian Empire. And the historic Armenian lands, even throughout the Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman history, was mostly the Armenian population, the cities named in Armenian languages, the monasteries. This has all been part of cultural genocide, of changing names of cities, getting rid of monasteries, getting rid of cultural sites. So this just shows you a little bit of the historic territory versus modern day Armenia. So since I put together this presentation, this PowerPoint, 3 years ago, the war that started in Armenia and Azerbaijan, between Armenia and Azerbaijan in September of 2020, this territory where the A and the R is in Armenia, the disputed territories since then have been occupied, and through a ceasefire with Russia involved, have been given to Azerbaijan. The 99% ethnic Christian Armenians that have lived there going back to historic times, as of September and happening right now, have been forced to either resettle, become refugees, or exterminated. Turkey has been funding mercenaries, ISIS mercenaries, to go and fight on the territory there because they don't have to abide by international war law or military law. And there's been some very horrific human crimes against humanity, including the use of white phosphorus and the use of snipers to shoot at kindergartners. And this is now being documented by our senators in Idaho and representatives, but also in Congress, so that action can be taken. That's what's happening today. But the history goes back a long time. Why is Turkey involved? Well, there is an effort to create a pan-Islamic state between Azerbaijan and Turkey. Ankara publicly has made the statement that we are two countries, one nation. And so there is an agenda and there is a militarization of and anti-Armenianism that's infused into the culture of Turkey and also Azerbaijan to move the gears towards connecting the two countries. And Armenia is not in the most friendly neighborhood. It is the only Christian nation in the region. And it's actually the only official Christian nation in the world and the earliest Christian people to convert to Christianity, I believe 30 in 307. So I will keep moving. That's just to kind of bring it to why is this relevant today? Because history isn't history. It's always pending. And nowadays, more than ever, we're seeing what's happening in this region cycle back. And the same clash and the same conflict that uprooted my family 30 some years ago is now repeating in exact same way and being documented. And very little action is being done by the international community, including with COVID. That's the vaccinations have been even, the access to the vaccinations have even been weaponized. So Armenia is the only nation in this region that has not received vaccines from the United States. And that is because of the kind of lobbying that's happening to suppress the people, to make it difficult for them to be able to focus on two fronts, a pandemic and a war. So if you get a chance, write your legislators and ask them, why is Armenia, our Christian ally in this region, the only country not receiving vaccines when we have promised to deliver vaccines to nations that have disparity? At 7 years old, my family and I were hunted. We were hunted like animals. We will come back to this. Uh-oh, Jeff, what did I do? It's probably me that's not working. I think either, did I skip one? It's okay. And I probably should be pointing there. Oh, there's my beautiful family. So something else, just to give enough background. I think that if you only look at what's happening there with one slice of one person's experience, that would be a miss. So what I do is try to give a little of the bigger history to understand the region, understand what's happening before one person's experience, if that makes sense. So this is the red points to go back to the 1915 genocide. And the reason I refer to it so often is because in my family, and this is not unusual, in my Armenian family and in almost every Armenian family, genocide has been inherited in a way for about 6 to 7 generations. So in my family, we have experienced direct genocide, not secondhand or traumatic generational knowing of genocide, but we have experienced and survived and uprooted in our family for 6 generations. My family's lineage goes back to Ottoman Empire. On my mother's side, my great-grandparents, they were walked through the Trail of Tears into the Syrian desert, and that was to exterminate, to walk the Armenian population out of Ottoman Turkey in order to be able to execute it without having the consequence of the international community as killing your own citizens, which would count as war crimes at that time. They were saying they were simply relocating us to safety. My maternal grandmother's family, they escaped to Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, and then made their way through Syria to Uzbekistan, where my grandmother on my mother's side was born. And then they made their way to Baku because it was a thriving city for merchants, and my grandfather was involved in the oil rigs, and Baku is known for two golds, one being caviar and the other one being oil. I mean, that's the business that my maternal grandfather was in. The red points are points of executions. Some information about the effectiveness of the 1915 genocide. So at that time, the concentration of the Armenian population lived in this region. And now the diaspora is spread all over the world. But at that time, the concentrated Armenian population was in its ethnic homeland. 2/3 of the Armenian population was executed during the 1915 genocide. And that 2/3, not to minimize or depreciate the value of human life, but the 2/3 that was strategically executed were the intelligentsia. It was the priests, the culture holders, the authors, the thinkers, the books. I say the cream of the crop of our population, but that's not, again, to minimize, but they are the people that would actually be able to organize the population or save a community or be able to tell the story or document or know how to point out the violations that were happening. And it just really scattered the population, because now there's 12 million Armenians in the world, and the majority of them are outside of Armenia. There's only about 2.5 million in Armenia. And I think the Pasadena, Glendale area has more Armenians than Armenia. And some of you are nodding yes, because you know that other large populations of our Armenians are in Uruguay, Argentina, France. South America played a very crucial role in the relocation of survivors after the genocide. And something to note, the word genocide didn't even exist yet. The word genocide was coined after the Holocaust. So at this time, 1915, there was the words of being used are massacre, mass killings, but not yet with the gravity of what is genocide when it comes to the international community, as far as a systemic execution or elimination of people. And these are photographs taken during the deportations in Turkey. If it wasn't for, oh, now I forgot his name. If it wasn't for the journalist, a German journalist, and the American missionaries, the nuns, that documented what was happening, we wouldn't even be able to have this conversation. So as you see there, the men were gathered. The men are being marched through the city. The children separated from their families. People displaced with what they can grab and going into the desert. And these photos, they seem so distant from us because they are black and white. But there are, oh, I'm trying to find. So these are photos sorry, my slides seem to be, they're out of order, I'm skipping them, but it's okay, Jeff. I'll get to them. I can tie things together pretty well if you follow. Are you following me? Okay. So these are pictures of Baku. These are pictures, they're not enhanced and they're not with special effects. The reason I have these pictures is because there is a perception here in the West, oftentimes, maybe not by people who have traveled and are aware of uh, how ancient some other parts of the world are and developed. But there is a notion that when someone is displaced and they're a refugee and they're resettled, that they are coming from some kind of third world, undeveloped mud hut society that, no wonder those people over there don't have it together. They probably don't have plumbing, and no wonder they can't stay alive and always have wars. And they need our help, right? They need our intervention. But we came from a very developed city. And why I point this out is there's also a belief, we all want to kind of think that if we live in a developed country, in a developed nation, that these atrocities can't happen, that these atrocities are something that only happen far away in, again, underdeveloped places. Here's a picture of me. And I'm sitting, this is a very popular picture that a lot of Soviet children have, because our Bugs Bunny and this cartoon here is a very popular cartoon that was used in the propaganda of showing kind of the working class and the lazy class in a communist society. So it was very common. I know a lot of kids, and they all have a picture just like this, because these would be propped up in the parks for kids to take pictures with. This fur coat that I'm wearing, my father was in the fur business, not legally, because you can't be in any business legally in the Soviet Union with the state owning distribution and commodities. And so him and his colleagues, they distributed government goods and flipped them for profit in markets. And so they were entrepreneurs in a society where it was illegal to be an entrepreneur. And that's not to say my dad is special, because almost everyone in the Soviet Union participated in the counter economy. Grandmothers would sell handkerchiefs and lipsticks on the street corners. If you needed something, someone knew someone that they could get it from, as they would say, under the floor or under the table. So especially commodities that were from the West that were banned, certain textiles, records, books, anything that was from the West, that was illegal, that was not allowed in the country. But if you knew someone, you could most likely get these goods. And let's see then. This is a picture of my family. That's baby me over there. I was never happy. And my mother, my father, my brother, cousin, my grandfather, and my aunt. This is in our home in Baku. We lived on the 12th floor of a 16-floor condominium overlooking the People's Plaza with a giant statue of Karl Marx. And that's where all the demonstrations would happen. That's where the parades would happen. So we had a great view of the city from where we lived. This is my father, shish kebabbing on the 12th floor of a condominium. Definitely not up to code, but that's what he did. And my grandfather. This was not uncommon as a child, and I know as children where sometimes our psyche is very selective and almost chooses to hold firm to the very positive memories and somehow filter out or reframe negative memories. But even when I speak to my cousins and relatives who were older than me, this was not uncommon. We had gatherings, and we were at other people's homes too. It was always family oriented. Our homes were full of people. We would have dinner parties, no holidays, no occasions, just really enjoying living together. And this is very true to our culture, because we don't eat alone. It's just, you might as well not eat. We kind of have to have someone there and make it an occasion. So this, I think, is my second birthday. I think this is my second birthday because I see what my father's wearing. A little, just to show a little bit of the countryside too. This is my father camping with his friends or hunting, except for they never catch anything. So they would take food with them and just experience the outdoors. This is a picture of my mother, my brother and I, my grandmother. This is probably, maybe I'm 3 or 4 here. And so their expressions are even different. The pictures they took after the genocide and after the war, it weared on them, and you could tell. Again, very common for us to have gatherings. At these weddings and celebrations, Armenians and Azerbaijanians and Jews and Georgians and Christians and non-believers, I mean, everyone was sitting next to each other, celebrating together, neighbors, friends, colleagues. It was a very peaceful time in society. In fact, in the Soviet Union, religion was outlawed. So there wasn't really that visible expression of I'm a Christian or you're a Muslim or you're a Jew. There was one shared identity of being a citizen of the Soviet Union, being a Soviet, and that was a very shared identity. I don't think this will play, but this was Reagan. And this is something I think that the people in this room would remember and know. When I give this presentation, when I am asked to come and speak at the high schools, just even the mention of the Soviet Union is just past their knowing of the world. It's a different world now. So to them, it sounds like I'm talking about the Roman Empire. It's that far away. And when people ask me, you know, where are you from? Where were you born? It's such a weird process, because how do you tell someone you're from a place that no longer exists? And then you have to really kind of give them the layers of why it doesn't exist and how it existed. It's not like, oh, Idaho Falls, Idaho. That's where I was born. No, I am from the Soviet Union. It's an empire that no longer exists. It collapsed. It was a communist empire. So it's strange. It's strange to have those conversations, but they open up and help me unpack a little bit better what the Western psyche is about that region, and it helps whoever I'm talking to understand what our experience was like on the other side. So this is the famous speech by Reagan of asking Gorbachev to bring down that wall. Do you remember this? It was such an exciting time. It was such a real pivotal, in the moment time, I'm sure, here in the West. And it felt very real, it felt very powerful, and it felt like a win, like a final win to the Cold War. Does that sound about accurate? And that's my guesstimate. But while the West was celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dismantling of the Soviet Union, on the other side of that wall was my family and 290 million people surviving this real-time collapse of an empire. One of the world's most ethnically diverse countries, the Soviet Union had more than 100 distinct ethnicities living within its borders. I believe 26 official languages. With independence movements and nationalism on the rise, ethnic tensions increased in some of the former Soviet Union republics. So now we have the perspective of a pandemic, which is real time, life threatening, society shifting happening. And at least we have the ability to use currency. At least we have the ability to dial 911. At least there are now, and first there was panic, but there's definitely groceries in the grocery store. There's services, public and private here, transportation, and there's no one outside your door screaming death to you because of your identity, death to you because of your background, and hunting you down, making a list of where you live, spray painting a cross on your door, circling which neighborhoods to be targeted and concentrated on, utilizing dump trucks to bring iron rods, construction steel metal, makeshift weapons to weaponize the mob, and cutting your phone line so you can't call for any emergency. When this pandemic happened, there were a lot of triggers I could tell for my parents. There were a lot of them in me because just the background noise of the news and the TV with the fear and the worry and instability positioned us back into this time of when all of those things echoed in a similar way, even though the danger was different. And in some way, I think that families who have survived genocide or instability or a natural disaster or war, they were at an advantage during this pandemic because shifting and pivoting into survival mode is something in them. It's natural, it's almost a reflex. And I think in my family that was true because the first thing that I think we did was turn off the TV. Because now not only was it creating that emotion in us, but it was also imprinting on my children, the smaller generation who has no perspective and has no coping mechanisms of how to process such chaos. And what we did was we pivoted and shifted gears into sewing face masks. And that's something we did for two reasons. One, there was a demand for it. But two, it kept us in a repetitive motion of doing something that was therapeutic and kept us around the dinner table so that we were safe, productive, and it gave new meaning to this pandemic to us in that time. Okay, there goes Reagan. This is the imagery that was all over the world, seeing the Soviet soldiers on one side and seeing West Berlin free itself from the grips of communism. And celebrating it. When I think about my short life and how I have heard the West demand for walls to be brought down, and just a few years ago, demand for walls to be built back up, it feels so contradictory to its own values. And we can have a very long conversation about different walls and different times. But when you grow up hearing the nation that adopted you and saved your family's life ask for walls to come down and then want to build walls, it shakes you because now you don't know the identity of who adopted you in some way. And that's something just personal in me that, that I process because I am like you also living through everything new happening But at the same time, while I experience that, I also re-experience and try to make sense of the past while I'm getting to know America in the present. This, whoops, did I skip that map? Oh, it won't show it. This is another video. But those little crosses on that map, it won't show it, and that's okay. The crosses on that map, that's how neighborhoods were identified that were predominantly Armenian, so that the mobs could go and door to door and kill people off. And our relatives' names, my family names, we were on those lists. Actually, my grandfather, he disappeared for a few weeks. We didn't know where he was, and his name was on the already killed list. And then he appeared, and we thought, well, somebody made a mistake. But what was happening was, even when someone was killed, because death certificates were being falsified, they would just put a name and match it with a body and issue a death certificate, so that there would be no possible indication that these were mass killings. And the cause of death on the death certificates would be just randomly assigned: kidney failure, trauma to the head, heart condition, even if that person priorly never had these conditions. This is a picture of the cover of my book. And so this is the original picture I took of the pictures when we were deciding the cover of the book. So it's a little more cleaned up for the cover. These pictures were taken of us after we were displaced, and there was no documentation of us after we migrated to Armenia from Azerbaijan seeking refuge. At the same time that we escaped the ethnic killings in Baku, December of '88, I don't know if you recall, but Armenia had one of the worst earthquakes. It was an 8.6, I believe, earthquake. And it was in the middle of winter, in the middle of a collapsed empire. And while it had no official government or currency or infrastructure for distribution of goods, because it was in the middle of winter, and actually because it's not because in the middle of winter, but because there was a nuclear plant in Armenia, the nuclear plant was shut down. And so it was a very cold winter. It was a very cold winter. There was no shelter because two of the major cities completely collapsed, all the shelters, all the condominiums. This is due to the excellent quality work that the Soviet government is known for in producing construction buildings. They would, everyone would cut corners. And so those buildings, they just crumbled, leaving 25,000 people immediately dead. It was in the afternoon and children were in school. So many of the schools collapsed, and leaving 150 people crippled, 150,000 people crippled. And that's just in Armenia, while there's 300,000 Armenian refugees fleeing out of Baku to Armenia. That strain on a country the size of the state of Maryland at this time was just absolute devastation. So the international community kicked itself into gear and tried to place as many Armenians in different countries as they could. Our case was picked up, but our paperwork was sent. My father, he was not naive. There were some people who really had wishful thinking that there is no way the Soviet Union will collapse. There's no way that our neighbors will be mobilized against us. The rhetoric will not transform into violence. And it did. My father knows history, and because of it being part of our family history, he immediately filed for asylum, or filed with the embassy to grant us refugee status. but our paperwork went to our home address in Azerbaijan, and we're homeless at this time in Armenia. This is my brother and my mother reuniting. What my parents did was put my brother and I on a bus while the killings were going on and while the violence was increasing. They put us on a bus that was one of the last buses to leave out of Azerbaijan because the trains also stopped running. And there were the only other way, and people did escape this way, was on the cargo, not pontoon, but cargo ships, and cross the Caspian Sea into Central Asia. And then they figured out where to go from there. But that was just to escape away from the violence. So here's my brother. This picture really, I feel my brother in this picture, not only because he's a mama's boy, but because I remember being put on a bus and bribed with a stick of gum because I have very, very low price. So the stick of gum was enough, I guess, to separate me from my parents and get me to trust complete strangers. And I remember in the back of the bus seeing my parents and kind of waving and thinking, well, they'll get on eventually or something. But when we arrived and they weren't there, I really remember feeling an anger towards them, thinking they don't want us anymore or they abandoned us. So I really feel for my brother in this picture because he did suffer from that separation. He really, in his mind, and I believe in my mind, I just kind of compartmentalize trauma a little different. But he really thought they didn't want us, or they were through with us, or they were gone. And I feel for the separation of children happening now. And again, we can have a very long conversation on what's different. But from a child's perspective, and that's what I'm hoping my book does, is bring the child voice of all of these conflicts into the conversation too, and the experience children have. It doesn't feel like policy or politics. It feels like abandonment, hurt, abuse, and sadness. So here is a picture of them reuniting. I most likely was probably left at home because I don't listen and would have run around the train station. So I am oftentimes not in these pictures. But that's my father, and this documents all of our belongings, the boxes and a few duffel bags. That's all we were able to take as far as our possessions. And this is lucky because in comparison, my grandparents were forced out of their home in their slippers and in their robe. As my grandmother would say, and she's a seamstress, I didn't even take a needle and thread. They were just forced out of their home. This article I shared with you about the earthquake happening. So when the earthquake happened in Armenia, so two things are happening here at this time. Three things. An empire is collapsing. Ethnic tension and clashes are rising throughout the republics that are demanding independence and having independence movements, national identity being questioned, nationalism, populism on the rise. And the third thing is environmental disasters. So in Armenia, this environmental disaster, this is in Armenian, this was published in a newspaper in '89. And again, you can recognize me by my fabulous fur coat. Our entire family is in fur coats. We're probably the most high fashion dressed refugees you'll ever see. And that's because that's the business that my father was in, not because we were in a couture. But my mother, my brother, my uncles, this is a plane wreck what was happening after the earthquake is the international community was ready to respond and help. Mexico actually was the country that previously experienced one of the worst earthquakes. And they developed in Mexico technology and using dogs also to locate living people in the wreckage. And so Mexico was one of the countries that was ready to come to Armenia to help in that immediate moment. You have a window of opportunity to save lives before you chalk it up as a mass casualty. But what Azerbaijan was doing was shooting planes down at that time, humanitarian planes. And so United States and agencies like the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, they halted their efforts. And this was strategic so that there would again be instability in Armenia, the inability to respond to a humanitarian crisis and an environmental crisis. But more importantly, it was to keep journalists out of the region, because free media is the first step to justice and peace. And if you can keep media out, if you can isolate or make the media into enemies, you can do anything. And I heard this even 3-4 years ago here, how the media was created into an enemy in the language of fake news. So we lived through a couple of different crises, but this is important, this article, because not only it documents what was happening in Baku with the family that survived, but it also documents that Azerbaijan was shooting down airplanes of humanitarian responders. Why we are included in this article is because my cousin, Sarkis, my father's older brother's son, was on this plane. He was the only Armenian on this plane. He was a Soviet soldier, and he was being sent by his commander to go and respond to the humanitarian crisis. And that's why they interviewed us. The journalists at that time, we were going there to pick up remains so we could bury something, bones or whatever could be found. There was no investigation ever done on this wreckage, and this is one of several planes that were shot down by the Azerbaijani government, called a crash. And when we were there, the media was able to interview us. So this is my first debut in a newspaper. And I was dressed very well. How's my time, Jeff? How? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we were homeless, and it wasn't unique. Like I said, 300,000 Armenians escaped as refugees to a country that just had a major earthquake and no shelter. There wasn't even shelter for the people who were there before us. And as you can imagine, they weren't very happy to have us there. Straining on the system, straining on the infrastructure, getting in the way, competing for the very little bit of jobs that were available. And we felt that. We were homeless for about this. Oh, there, this is in 1995. I wasn't there in 1995. I was in Twin Falls. So this is my aunt. This is my aunt who went back to our shelter, the door there. We took shelter in there. This is a school in Armenia. That's me on the dean's list. There's other pictures. I think they went out of order, but my father somehow met a principal who felt empathy by what had happened to us. And when he heard about how my aunt was murdered in our grandparents' apartment, and when he heard about the horrific violence that my father experienced and that we as children survived, he, for some reason, he told my father that we could hide out and we could live in this storage unit that's attached to the school, a functioning school, first through 12th grade. And so in the summertime, there was no one there. We didn't have to really hide as much. We could play in this courtyard, my brother and I. But in the season, in the school season, we would try to not be seen. Yet we would attend the school. So I started first grade. My first grade experience was, there's another door. This is a hallway, a corridor that connects the upper grades with the elementary grades, first through fourth or something like that. And then the upper classes are on the other side. There's a gymnasium and eroded. There were rats in this school that were bigger than my Yorkies. And they were vicious because they too were starving. The people were starving, but the rats were starving because rats eat garbage we throw away. If we don't have food, we don't have garbage to throw away. So they would attack people, these rats. No plumbing, no running water, no heat. My father put that door there and closed up the window so that we could have some kind of privacy. And then when they were away, when my parents were away, so we would be safe as children, so no one would kidnap us or abuse us or kill us or rob us thinking we had anything. My aunt, I asked her, I said, would you please go there and take a picture? And she went and took a picture. And in 2007, I had the opportunity to go back to Armenia and go here and visit and document our life there. So going to first grade, my experience was something like this. Getting ready in the dark, in the cold, putting on our uniforms because the school system was still a Soviet government school system, which is why you'll see our very Soviet uniforms. That straight A student in the middle up there, that's me. And I think this period of my time was the only time I was ever not late to class, because it was across the hall from where we lived. Other than that, I've never been on time to class here in the United States. This day, I remember very clearly. I did not have bows, those big bows. So girls had to wear bows, especially on formal government days, government holidays, Soviet holidays. So even though the Soviet Union collapsed, they kind of played on this. They tried to stretch out control by continuing the holidays and the rhetoric and the patriotic showings of we are still the Soviet Union, even though it was clearly crumbling. In the photos, so the girl that's to my right, I was bullied horribly in school, horribly. A good day was when it was verbal. My brother and I had feces smeared on us. We were spat on, we were beaten. We would have kids put the teacher's objects off her table in our backpacks so that we would become thieves and be beaten in front of the class, because hitting the teachers back then, they would hit kids in front of the other pupils, make a lesson out of you. There was not a day that we were not violated. On this day, I showed up to the photo day without bows in my hair, and my teacher pointed out the fact that because we are so stupid, these Armenians from Baku, they are so stupid that they don't hear when you tell them, come with bows tomorrow. And she didn't understand that we didn't have bows. We didn't grab them while we were being thrown out of our home. So that girl next to me, her bows were taken off her head and put on my head, not by choice. And after my photo was taken, when her bows were taken off my head and handed to her, she threw them and said, "They are now infested. I don't want them. They're full of lice." And that really stayed with me. There's a few other children, refugee children here, who had the same horrible experience as me. And these are my people, quote unquote. These pictures are now after when we actually are preparing to come to the United States. So this is in Moscow, Russia. We lived in that shelter, in that school for almost 4 years like that. No money, no paycheck, just surviving with whatever my father could get from the streets, or my mother would can or be lucky to buy. Often my brother and I, we would forage. We would eat what we could find on the ground. We would just eat fruit and grass, and we didn't know better, and we were kids. This is right before we are in our last interview and vetting stage in Moscow at the American Embassy, the United States Embassy. The expressions, that's my grandfather, and the weight, his weight that he dramatically lost after my aunt was murdered in their house, and they were displaced. They weren't displaced to Armenia. When they were displaced, they had no choice. They were sent to Moscow, Russia, and were given a hotel room to live in temporarily. This is the first picture taken of us when we arrived in Twin Falls, Idaho. The man sitting on the corner there, John Smith is his name. He is a US veteran. He's passed away since. He served in, I think, a Vietnam War, Korean War. And the man sitting right here, you could see him a little bit, is Roger Davis, Captain Roger Davis with the Salvation Army. They were one of the first people, and their wife his wife is taking the picture. She was a captain in the Salvation Army. They were the first people, among the first people to welcome us. The Salvation Army, I write about it in my book, has been a constant presence in my life. When the earthquake happened, one of the first organizations that knew they were taking a risk of being shot down in the airway took the initiative to actually land in Armenia and provide humanitarian help. My father ate at their food truck and brought back to us what he could. And then when we arrived in Twin Falls, the Salvation Army was a block away. And my father recognized the sign, their symbol, and we went there. He ended up working for the Salvation Army as a janitor for 11 years. And my brother and I and my mother, we ended up going there and being part of the programs, my brother and I being part of the after school program. They helped us with homework and to educate us. But most of all, they saw our complete humanity when we were absolutely dirt poor and couldn't offer anything back. We couldn't put anything in the tithing. We couldn't be of any service or even volunteer because we didn't speak English. And that stayed with me all my life. To this day, I have a very strong relationship with the Salvation Army as an organization, not even so much as a church. And I currently serve on their board in Twin Falls, on their advisory board. Oh, and I had one outfit and it's in every picture. So that sweater is in every picture. And I never changed my hairstyle, as you could tell. This is us at the Salvation Army. We later became members of the church. And most of what really stayed with us is that the Salvation Army in Twin Falls 28 years ago opened its door to all refugees being resettled. regardless of who was Christian, who was Muslim, who was atheist, who was whatever. And there wasn't a string attached. They helped people without the demand or the unspokenness of eventually you'll need to convert or become a member. That wasn't ever felt. So we had Bosnian Muslim friends that attended this building of after school programs, basketball, holidays that we would spend together. So we would have that cultural integration at the same time that we had fellowship and friendship and felt welcome. The name of my book is Liminal, and this is a definition of liminal. People always ask me, what does it mean? And it basically is, and I believe a lot of people go through this, not just refugees, people in cycles of addiction, people that go through a divorce, retirement is a big liminal phase, changing careers, transitioning as a person. It is when you are no longer who you were, but you're not yet who you will become. You're in the liminal pending threshold phase. When I came across this word, it really sealed in me that word that I always felt I didn't know to identify my experiences. And I became okay with it. I made good with it. And liminality and liminal and those phases and changes that have moved me from one side of the world in a completely different world to another side of the world in a completely different world. I've embraced that as a blessing, as a superpower, and as just a very exciting way to be human. Or I could choose doom, gloom, bitterness, and to dwell in the pain. And it took me many years to not dwell in the pain. In 2005, I think I said 2007, but 2005, I went back to that storage unit we lived in, a little more depreciated and destroyed, that school. But I walked away from that courtyard. I'm holding a camera, a video camera, because I recorded that pilgrimage my family had there. Excuse me. Because I'm hoping to work into a documentary film with Liminal. And when I walked away, I experienced something that I didn't prepare myself for or never really thought I would. But I felt like I left that girl behind. I felt like I had to leave that girl behind that lived there, that experienced all that, because she served me up to that point, but she couldn't continue on in the United States with me. It was a type of grieving. I can't fully express it, but it's a type of grieving and maybe a type of closure. But I felt that happen when I went back. And after that, I found the courage to write the manuscript for my book, which I've been putting together for 18 years. There's my brother, also there. And he cried. Him and I had a really long experience there. Oh, there's those slides. This is just to show what was happening with the Armenian population, 1915. And these pictures are of the Syrian displaced families just a few years ago. Armenia resettled 17,000 Syrian refugees, again, with the economy it has, which is horrible, and being the size of Maryland. In comparison, that same year, the United States, I believe, resettled about 5,000. Modern day pictures of displaced families, Syrians, many also are Armenian Syrians, and then the Armenian genocide. People will ask me, why do you care about these people? Why do you care about the kids at the border? Why do you care about these Syrians? I am this kid. In my book, the purpose I wrote it was to heal to document, but for it to serve a bigger purpose. As people resettle here, they want to hurry up and get into the American way of life, but they don't focus on the fundamentals. You have to tune your mind. You have to get into the right mindset, because if you come from a communist or a war-torn or a refugee camp living, and now you're in a free society, you have to acclimate in a very healthy, wholesome, honest way. It's different for everyone, and it takes time and it takes resources. But if that's not done, all you've done is just sweep the trauma and the difficulties under the rug, and it will surface up again, whether it's in your generation or in your ailments or your children's generation. A lot of times refugees, just because of mode of survival or access to the population at large, they stay in their subgroups. You might have noticed that if you are a resettlement community here. Bhutanese people stay together, Russian people stay together, the Bosnians keep to themselves. They have social activities, they have their own things they do, but they don't integrate. I imagine even that the museum has hard to reach communities, even maybe Hispanic communities, and you have an excellent board. You have ways to brainstorm on how do we get past that barrier. So on the other end, I tell the refugee communities, the social exposure is crucial, not only for the healing, but you learn about this country by experiencing this country through locals. You learn about Halloween. We arrived in September from just surviving a war and genocide. And then in November, there's people knocking on our door with a knife through their head and blood. So no one told us about Halloween. And it wasn't just one person, it's a lot of people with skeletons. And you don't think about this, but for someone who has experienced seeing that outside their door, it's not so pleasant when you don't know it's going to happen. Language, that's a lifeline. When the refugee center resettles people, when the refugee program resettles people here, they're on a program for 8 months. The first thing the center is tasked with is to get them staffed into a job. Self-sufficiency is the objective. Very important. But if they miss the opportunity to learn the language, they have just stunted themselves. They have just made themselves dependent on the rest of society. And you can do very little with that in a new country if you're not equipped with the language. I work with resettlement companies, resettlement agencies. I just finished training 3 months ago 300 Idaho resettlement employees through IRC and the Refugee Resettlement Program Network. And the thing I stress to them the most is don't just resettle the laborer, resettle the whole human. That includes mental health. People have survived torture. Children have seen horrific crimes. Just because you put people on a plane and leave them on a new land, there's no reset button. The whole human needs to be integrated, healed. And there is the difference between assimilation and integration. Every program, institution, whether it's private or public, if it has a resettlement community in its community, it is our duty to review how are we participating in the resettlement process. Are we just bringing people here to work the jobs that we can't get people to work, and that's their only value? Or do we integrate them? What's our responsibility? It's not one agency's job to resettle people and integrate them. We are the ambassadors of our community. It's our job to, in our role, in our capacity, integrate people in a healthy way. There's some examples. I have built on these and I do trainings on many of these. And then I know people who have already worked in this area and do amazing work in this area as well. And that's it. I don't think this video will play. And so what I'll do, Jeff, is I don't think so because it has some bad language and maybe not. But if you want to see it on your own time, I was thinking, how do I want to end this portion? I want to say that, you don't have to experience becoming a refugee to feel the value of your struggle. We're all displaced at times in our life. Dwell on what you do have instead of what you lack. Take inventory of all the blessings in your life and ask, what good shall I do with my life today? Life creates conditions conducive to success. I believe that. I have lived it. I have seen it even ever since I was little. I have seen life create conditions that are conducive to success in death pits, in earthquake, destroyed zones, in poverty, in violence. Life always creates conditions that are conducive to success. What we can learn from refugees is they can teach us that what it means to truly succeed through their hunger, through their interdependence, and most of all, through their gratitude for life. So I guess I will end by saying, whatever you are experiencing or someone you know possibly experiencing in life, to trust life more and be willing to learn and be willing to look to the people who are different than you in the ways that they have lived and experienced life. And they will inspire you to find that place inside yourself where nothing is impossible. So thank you. And if we have time, I hope we have time because I'm not good at keeping time. I would welcome your questions, your comments, your experience of this time and this period. Yes, sir.
Your original language, and when did you branch out into English?
Yes, my firstborn language, the home language, was Russian because in the Soviet Union, under Russian colonialism, it was outlawed to speak our native tongue, and we were to speak Russian. That was the administrative language. So I learned how to read and write Russian before I even went to school because my brother had a tutor, and sitting next to my brother, I would pick up on reading and writing in Russian. Then when we were displaced to Armenia, I started first grade and I learned formal Armenian. I would speak Armenian. My parents could never help me with homework because they are not fluent in Armenian. They could speak it, but not read and write it. And in fourth grade, when I was resettled to the United States, I began English Second Learning courses, ESL, which focuses on conversational English mostly. And I would say that in knowing and being honest with my own skill level, I was illiterate in English until probably my 20s, where I found that confidence that I could read, write, spell, which I still struggle a little bit with, but the conversational English I had down through high school. Yes.
Thank you so much for my question, but I was wondering, at one point you said you look back on that life that you had, everything you had to go through, and you just made it kind of forward. And I was wondering, I mean, I never imagined having gone through what you went through. Do you think that your experience defines you right now as the main factor that defines you, or would you say what does define you? What would you tell someone? Mother, or what's the main thing that you define you today?
Oh, that's a big question. I was hoping it was going to be like a very simple math problem or something. That's a really difficult question because I feel what defines me, the word define, really shapes who I am and how I experience day-to-day world, its textures, how I process what's happening. I would say it's my PTSD. I think that my chronic PTSD is what defines me. Now, all those other hats, right, that we wear in society, mom, sister, businesswoman, author, they're frivolous. They're superficial. I mean, I could be motherly without being a mom, right? I could be an entrepreneur without having a business title. So I believe that the thing that I wake up with and go to sleep with the most as a shaper of my experience is my mental health, my PTSD, and the focus is to orient my life and orient my well-being to not allow the PTSD to be in the driver's seat. So that is my main objective and goal every single day. I used to self-medicate, and it was a little easier to do that because you could trick the PTSD into being distracted and drunk or high. But I got to a point where I owed it to myself to not be the biggest liar in the room with myself. And I made the choice that I rather have it harder and suffer, but be authentically in control and not have the PTSD in control and in the shadows, than to numb out for the rest of my life. I might as well have not survived all this if I'm going to numb out for the rest of my life and pass that on to my children. So that's a very big question. I would say that's the thing that defines me the most. Everything else succeeds or fails from that. If that PTSD is not in my realm of health, control, and management, I'm a horrible mother. I'm not going to work. I am processing the world in the worst way. I'm my worst enemy, and I'm not functioning. So that is what defines me. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
It looks like historic Kurdistan and historic Armenia kind of overlap a little bit. Is there a connection between those two cultures?
You know, there wasn't, which is so interesting, right? Because Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, even Afghanistan, even Turkmenistan, these are predominantly Muslim nations. Azerbaijan is a predominantly Muslim nation. Sufism is the sect. And so anytime I hear someone reduce this all down to religion, Christian and Muslim, I squash it because that is a lie. That is the biggest lie, that the enemies are due to religion. The day before the killings, we lived among each other and we shared resources and built together, married each other, loved each other, had friendships. So what happened the day that tipped that? Well, I'll tell you, in my opinion, I'm not an expert and I've lived only one life, but the classic tools of division work and rhetoric works, and the grooming of a people to see another group as a threat or an other or less than human works. There are stages to genocide, and I apologize, I don't have that slide, but there's 10 stages to genocide. The very last stage is the hardest stage, but the cleanest stage. It's not violent because it's the rewriting of history. It's the covering up. It's the changing the policy so that this group kind of is wiped out, right? In the language, in the language of textbooks, language of history writing. Stage 9 is the execution of a surplus of subhuman bodies. You know, you have to get rid of bodies. What do you do with them? You can only house them for so long, or they start to strain on your system and economy. So, or they might rebel. Stage 1 through 7 are the ones that are preparing good human beings, decent human beings on accepting stage 9, right? This is classic, like what we saw in the Holocaust, in Cambodia, Rwanda. There is this stage of dehumanization. The first 2 are just words, innocent words on the radio, on the TV, the talking heads. These people are taking our jobs. These people are marrying our women. These people are illegal. Or we make them illegal. We strip them of citizenship or paperwork. They're vermin, they're animals, they're killers, they're criminals, they're rapists. Okay, 4 years ago, we heard that. Then there's 3 through 5, where we systemically force and relocate people, where we separate children from their parents, where we warehouse people in mass populations. Boom, America is at stage 7. We're one step away from 9. And if you think 9 cannot happen, then you have a fetish version of history and of reality, because it's very easy to go from 7 to 9. The hardest steps are the first ones that are a shocker. How dare we talk about people like that? How dare we dehumanize people? Well, it's the tool. It's the classic tool of division. So it wasn't religion. And in Kyrgyzstan, the relationship between Armenia and Central Asia has not been hostile, even in policy. It's politicians who see the opportunity to poison the hearts of people in order to gain an upper hand, especially in a very corrupt system like modern day Russia and the Soviet Union, to grab resources and distract people. If you can have your fight over here, we can rob you over here. And that's what happened in Azerbaijan. And I don't know if you're aware of the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers that were just released. You're all nodding your head. You're very well read. So the Panama Papers about a decade ago were released, where it revealed all the offshore accounts of all the leaders in the world and how much corruption is tied to these accounts. And then 3 days ago, the Pandora Papers were released. Again, reporting on all this corruption. Azerbaijan has made the top of the list. The Aliyev family has made the top of the list, both in the Panama Papers and in the Pandora Papers 3 days ago. So the killing and all of that, that's a distraction. A couple of hundreds of thousands of lives lost is nothing if we can grab the resources and the power. Did I answer your question? I don't think so. Kyrgyzstan. Yes. Oh, okay. Same. Actually, they have an excellent relationship, because many Kurds are in Armenia, and there's a lot of Armenians that are ethnically Armenian or Kurdish, and they live in both. But Kurdistan, that's a, I didn't hear I thought you said Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan. So, and yeah, even with the Kurds, they have a really, I think, I'm not the ambassador for Armenia, but they have fought alongside each other. The oppression and suppression and the hostility from Turkey, they have faced that equally in the military. And the Kurds have had this genocide the Armenians experienced. When you talk about what's happened with the Kurds, it's just incredible what has happened to them, and how their nation was divvied up, and they're being oppressed from all angles. Yeah. They are, I believe they are still demanding a nation state. And Unfortunately, depending on what lobby is the strongest in Congress, that region is shaped different, administration to administration. And it's not a priority because the instability, a lot of times the instability serves us better than the stability. Yeah. Any more questions, comments? Yes?
I'm not sure I followed your story completely, but I gather that you were being persecuted very badly after the Berlin Wall fell. And the thing that allowed you to leave was the earthquake.
What we experienced was persecution in Azerbaijan following the fall of the Berlin Wall, but more so following the uprise of nationalism in Azerbaijan in order to gain independence as a nation state, as one of the republics. So Azerbaijan was in the process of wanting to become an independent republic. So was Armenia, so were the other 15 republics. But there was a region of land that is still disputed. That's why the conflict's going on today too. The territory I was pointing to, that region of land was being disputed, and it caused the retaliation looked like ethnic killing. That's the form it took. If it doesn't, it's not, if that territory is not annexed with Azerbaijan in the end, retaliation looks like this. We purge our country of Armenians, and that's what happened. Our resettlement to the United States is based on our displacement from Azerbaijan. It just so happens the earthquake happened. But we couldn't claim environmental refugee status as citizens of Armenia because we weren't citizens of Armenia. We were citizens of Azerbaijan. So our claim to refuge seeking stems from being displaced due to the ethnic killings. Very confusing. I imagine it's very confusing for the person that was processing paperwork at this time. You know, seeing rubber stamps and signatures from officials and authority that no longer exists. How do you vet people and process people that are from countries that don't exist or are pending? Thank you for your question. Any more questions or comments or experiences shared? Thank you for being such a patient audience and a curious audience, and for having me be your guest here today and becoming a part of my family's story. Thank you.